Hello students. This video is about one of the most controversial pieces that happened in the Jackson administration, especially his first term, which was scandal-ridden to begin with, partially because he didn't do a really great job of screening his cabinet members. This is often called the Petticoat Affair or the Peggy Eaton Affair. There's some good articles out there about Jackson and the barkeeper's daughter, as they call it. Jackson did not have any marital infidelity, partially because he was a widower when he came to D.C. He was very much in love with his wife, who had died just shortly after the election of 1828. But Margaret Timberlake, that was her after her first marriage. She was a young lady. She was a barmaid. Her father owned a bar in Washington, D.C. that many of the congressmen had frequented. And she was the wife of the Secretary of War for Jackson. And that was John Eaton. John Eaton was not considered a great choice for the job, mostly because of this recent marriage to Peggy Timberlake and the circumstances behind it. Now, she was charming, attractive. She was absolutely a very young lady at this time, early 20s. But made friends, and they stayed at her father's tavern. You know, it was basically, it's a boarding house and a bar. So she was Peggy Eaton, and I'll call her Eaton instead of Timberlake here for you. She literally was doing her job. Keep the patrons happy. And she was very forward with men. She was not your stereotypical woman of the age, but she married this Navy officer, John Timberlake, who was 22 years older than her. And Timberlake and Eaton were good friends, but Timberlake died of mysterious circumstances. So Eaton is going to marry one of his best friend's widows. Now, that's not the controversy, though. The controversy comes much later. And this is the thing. Was it a suicide? Were John Eaton and Peggy having an affair behind Timberlake's back? That's all conjecture. But when Jackson had a point, after he'd won, he said, "I want Eaton to be my Secretary of War." And Eaton went to Jackson and said, "I don't know, should I do this?" And Jackson goes, and he'll defend the common person. He said, you should marry this woman. And then John Eaton had made an honest woman of his mistress, according to Jackson. So they're married New Year's Day, 1829, just as Jackson is leaving to go to Washington for the inauguration in March. Now, that's not the controversy. The controversy centers around how Peggy Eaton was treated by the other wives of the cabinet. It was a social protocol for them to call on each other, to basically host a dinner. And Floride Calhoun, John Calhoun's wife, when it came the turn for Peggy Eaton to host, she said, "We aren't coming." They basically shunned Peggy Eaton, and that angered Jackson to no end, that his vice president's wife would have the gall to break social protocol. Now, Jackson had done that several times, but Jackson was wanting to keep certain things intact, and he said there's no way he's going to go after a gentleman's wife who he agreed to have his Secretary of War marry, even though the circumstances were extremely mysterious. So Jackson did remember his late wife, and this is the key to it. Jackson's wife, after the election of 1828, died of a heart attack. She was stressed out. During the election of 1828, she was called a bigamist. She was called almost everything by the Adams side. And it wore on her, and she died late December. So what happens is her death was affecting Jackson still to this time. And then, so he defends Peggy, he goes, she's as chaste as any woman in Washington. So he demands that the cabinet members make their wives recognize her. And when they didn't, it was a purge. Only one person really survived this purge, and that was Martin Van Buren. Van Buren cozied up to Jackson, being the manipulator that he was. He was a manipulator. That was the way the politics were of the day. And Jackson kept going against Calhoun. Calhoun was considered Southern aristocracy, a wealthy man, extremely, extremely wealthy. He also had a hot temper, like Jackson. He also felt strongly on Southern rights, and he thought Jackson might have been acting like a tyrant. Now, he also was going behind Jackson's back in writings, too. He did the same thing with Adams when he was Adams's vice president. Again, this affair, this Petticoat Affair, may have been exaggerated as one of the major causes of the Civil War, because what it does is creates Calhoun's reaction to the Union. And this had been building up for most of the first term. There had been a Jefferson Day toast that had gone on 1830. You had the Webster-Hayne debates over the role of the federal government. I mean, this is just, it's a defining period in American history. And this is just one of those incidents that gets pushed to the side as the Eaton Affair, or the Petticoat Affair, as you will see it in the text. But the biggest result of this is that Calhoun and Jackson showed that there's a bigger rift in the country. It was a separation, very big separation at that. And there's Van Buren again. Calhoun resigns in 1832 as the vice president with his own goals in mind to try to get Jackson out of office. Jackson and Calhoun will go head to head in 1832 over a tariff issue in South Carolina, and the fact that Calhoun thought that the state could nullify a federal tariff. But this is the other point that comes out of this, is that Martin Van Buren rises to prominence by taking Jackson's side and basically playing up to Jackson. Now, Calhoun, in the post-Eaton Affair world, he became the leader in the Senate. He becomes a senator from South Carolina, appointed by the South Carolina legislature. That Eaton Affair also ended Calhoun's desires to become the president. And Calhoun, from 1832 till his death in 1850, will become the spokesperson in the Senate for the idea of states' rights. Now, I'm not a big fan of this idea of states' rights. I think states' powers. But he wanted to protect slavery and the fact that the states were in a compact. He was very Jeffersonian in this aspect, probably more Jeffersonian than Jefferson was. And he planned on this idea of a concurrent majority because he was fearful, and he saw how the development of the North and the West was going to eventually hurt the South economically. This is that idea of a dual presidency, one from the South, one from the North. Guys, by 1832, sectionalism really is kicking in hard. And that leads us to the nullification controversy. And this is the one we'll do another video on shortly.